Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyagolu. Now, Malcolm X was one of the most charismatic leaders of the civil rights movement in the US, and at times the most controversial. His killing in 1965 sent shockwaves around the world, but doubts have lingered for decades about the murder convictions of Muhammad Aziz and Khalil Islam. The Manhattan District Attorney, Cyrus Vance Jr., decided 2 years ago to re-examine the case and has now let it be known he is throwing out their convictions. He said that the FBI and the police had withheld evidence that in all likelihood would have resulted in the acquittal of the men. He has apologized, saying they didn't get the justice they deserved. Here's Malcolm X speaking in the 1960s.
Every case of police brutality against a Negro follows the same pattern. They attack you, bust you all upside your mouth, and then take you to court and charge you with assault. What kind of democracy is that? What kind of freedom is that? What kind of social or political system is it when a black man has no voice in court, has nothing on his side other than what the white man chooses to give him? My brothers and sisters, we have to put a stop to this, and it will never be stopped until we stop it ourselves.
The electric Malcolm X there. Well, to explain what happened, I'm joined now by Arise special correspondent Carl Bostic. Great to see you, Carl. There's been a very lengthy investigation into this case. Why is this happening now? I mean, there's long been questions raised about the guilt of these two men and the accusation that they've been framed.
That's a very good question, Charles, because from the outset, it was always felt that the evidence was there beginning from the trial of these three men who were charged with the killing of Malcolm X. This happened in '65, and you had Khalil Islam, and you had Muhammad Aziz, and Mujahid Halim, all three being charged and convicted in very hasty process. In other words, it was an arrangement where only the gunman Mujahid Halim was arrested on the scene when he was about to give a speech in February '65. The other two, Khalil Islam and Islam and Azim, they were arrested like a week later, Charles, and then 2 weeks later they were charged, even though there's inconclusive evidence. What the problem was, Charles, was this. This was at a time when there was heightened racial tension because Malcolm X posed a threat to not only the Nation of Islam, which he had just announced a breakaway and a split from, but also to federal authorities who were worried about his calls for, resisting police brutality. What's ironic, though, is this, Charles. These two people who were exonerated, they were victims of the same sort of injustice and discrimination that's been experienced today. And that's why Malcolm X is such an icon, even for black activists today as well. Because what happened in the end, Charles, evidence was suppressed. In other words, it was suppressed that there were actually undercover police officers who were eyewitnesses at the event. The alibis offered by two of those people who were exonerated, that was not admitted into evidence. So all of that is gathering storm right now. But getting back to your question, one reason why this has been suppressed so long, first of all, you had a documentary series on who killed Malcolm X that Netflix aired last year. There was a Pulitzer Prize winning book called the dead will arise, that brought attention to all this. But the point also is this, Charles. This does not conclusively say who killed Malcolm X. It doesn't say whether there was a federal conspiracy behind killing Malcolm X because of the threat he posed. And then also, if they knew he was about to be killed, why didn't they prevent it? In fact, a news reporter for the New York Daily News received a phone call that morning saying he would be killed this afternoon or killed later this morning. And that's exactly what happened.
It's very interesting, you taking us back to those days, Carl, and you made a very interesting point that this represents a measure of irony because, I mean, these are examples of what Malcolm X was fighting against. Two black men picked up quickly on shaky evidence, speedily tried and jailed for so many years wrongfully. What's been the reaction to this from your sort of contacts in America? Because it is sort of bittersweet, isn't it? I mean, this has destroyed their lives because they were in prison for decades.
Bittersweet is maybe an understatement, Charles, because when you go back to consider it, okay, you've got Khalil Islam and Muhammad Aziz both exonerated. Only Aziz is alive today, Charles. He's about 83 years old. Between Aziz and Islam, together, they accumulated about 40 plus years in prison in New York, maximum security, many of those years in solitary confinement. So they each served about 20 years apiece, just slightly over that. And then even after they were released, they lived with the stigma of being the killers of Malcolm X. And their marriages and families broke down, and for decades, if it wasn't for the fact that their lawyers were trying to clear their name, that's what happened. But it's not enough satisfaction, because even you have the actual gunman, Mujahid Halim, who said during the trial in 1966 that these two had nothing to do with it. In 1977, he took a sworn deposition and he named the other 4 people who were behind it. So to give a quick example, Charles, Khalil Islam, he was the driver for Malcolm X. He was fair-skinned, light-skinned. You saw him in the photos with the beret over the hat on. He was one of the gunmen with the shotgun. However, an eyewitness said that the guy holding the shotgun was a very stocky, dark person with a dark beard who belonged to rival mosque. That was never entered into evidence. And what was not entered into evidence is that really Malcolm X was breaking away from the Nation of Islam. He belonged to the Harlem Mosque that he was, now leading. The other members who were behind the killing belonged to the Newark Mosque. It's all internal politics. But one reason why there's delayed as well in terms of this coming out, because at the end of the day, besides the undercurrents of whether or not the federal authorities or police were involved, because they didn't share information and didn't want to expose their tactics of how successfully they had infiltrated the Malcolm X team. In fact, one of his bodyguards was the police informant. At the same time, for black activists, it also exposed the fact that at the end of the day, this is an internal black-on-black killing from within his own people. That is one reason why you also have this delay.
Right, and just remind us, for the people who might not know who he was, just remind us who Malcolm X was. I mean, he was this hugely charismatic, enormously influential, very controversial figure back in the 1960s.
Well, to put things in perspective, Charles, it's this. If you were a young black American and you were coming to terms with your own identity in terms of pride and self-awareness, those kinds of things, myself included, I was, growing up in the 70s, your life was not complete as a black American, a young one, if you had not read the autobiography of Malcolm X, where he talks about black pride, those kinds of things. His closest rival, in fact, who exceeded him, was Martin Luther King, who was also assassinated 3 years later. Malcolm X actually had evolved from saying that whites were devils. He had advocated racial separatism, no cooperation with whites. But after traveling to Africa, he realized that Muslims were of different ethnic groups, of different colors, quite frankly. And the purpose of that speech at which he was assassinated was to say that we have to be more tolerant to different kinds of people. In fact, that's why he did not allow for screening of weapons for this speech, which led to his killing. But after Martin Luther King, he was the most charismatic and the most admired amongst black people, amongst black activists. And now today, he's still an icon, because at the very beginning, when he spoke about the issues that resonate today, like police brutality, bigotry and discrimination in the law enforcement system, he says we must resist by any means necessary, by any means necessary. And that was really the alarm bell for law enforcement officials, because that meant that if you need to use arms to protect yourself, you should use them by any means necessary. That's why it was such a threat to authorities, but also internally to the Nation of Islam.
Carl, thanks very much indeed. Carl Bostic, Arise special correspondent, talking to me there about Malcolm X and the 2 men who have now been exonerated, who were initially accused of assassinating him. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja and around the world. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.